You can worry about it later.
All right.
It's really quite simple, Elmar. Once you see it, it'll give you options, and you just download it.
You're recording now.
All right, recording. So I guess we officially start. According to my schedule, it says check-in, announcements. Are there any announcements? Except I want to make one for May 29th. Is our next meeting. And actually Harrison Snow will be the host. And he will be talking about organizational trauma, the we versus they dynamic. So I'm very excited about that. I'm definitely going to be there.
Okay.
So please join us all to that conversation.
I might add one note, Elmar. Ellen and I got talking about leadership competencies.
Yeah.
So I try to sneak that in. How do we build leadership competencies systemically?
Okay, great.
And so I'll try to expand it a little bit.
I think I'm going to make a review here. Yeah. So before I start, I need to really thank three people. I need to thank Harrison Snow for actually helping me set this up, because I'm really kind of a novice when it comes to Zoom. So thank you so much for your help and support and helping me to set this up. And then I need to thank David Todd, for the marketing. And also actually he volunteered to help me with Q&As today. So if you have questions during the presentation, I think the best would be if you put them into the chat note, and then David can actually maybe help me getting through the questions you might have. And last but not least, I want to thank Catherine Curran, because she actually helped us with constant contact, and she was able to send out the invitations, and she's maintaining a mailing list for us. So I really appreciate that. Thank you. And if you wouldn't mind muting yourself right now, that would be very helpful, because I have background noise here. And you mute yourself on the bottom left. There's a mute button. That would help me. Great. So the topic is structural constellations. And I'm actually kind of curious. Who here knows about structural constellations? Can anybody just raise their hand? Okay. Has anybody trained in structural constellations? Okay, thank you. So a little bit. So I'm not officially trained either, but I have been working with structural constellations for a long time. And just for the ones who might not know, this kind of constellation was introduced to us actually by Matthias Vargert von Kibbet and Insa Sparrow, a couple from Germany. And they have introduced this work in 1998. So quite a long time ago. And I came across some of their books just shortly thereafter. And I started reading them, and I got really excited. But at the time, I actually felt very alone, because I couldn't talk to anybody about this. Nobody knew this work. And I was just sort of like fumbling around by myself. And to this day, actually, I do a lot of structural constellations, and not necessarily by design. It's more like that's kind of actually the way I actually think. And when something shows up, then I just find a structure to set this up. And so throughout my presentation, I'll talk a little bit about that. So because I haven't really been able to have conversations about this work, I have no idea where the conversation actually is in this field, especially here in America, because I'm not aware that there is a conversation about this work. There is in Europe for sure, but not here, not to my knowledge. And I've been doing this work for a long time, and I've never come across, except recently, Harris and I, we just started talking a little bit about it. And we're starting a conversation. And the reason actually I want to do this presentation is I want to start a conversation around this work, because I think it is very powerful, is very simple, and it can be used in organizations, which to me is a great plus, because there aren't that many constellation possibilities in organizations that are safe. So I guess I'm going to start with my slides. Let's see how this works. Can you all see the slides? Or this slide?
Yes.
Thank you. Oops, somehow it's a different direction. I'm not sure. Oh, okay. Oh, it starts with the end. No, I want to start at the beginning. Okay. There we go. So I want to share a little bit how my personal journey and why I'm so connected to structural constellations. So I want to start actually with this image. Can anybody read this image? This is actually a mechanical engineering drawing. And this is what I studied when I was 15 years old. I became a mechanical engineer. And as a mechanical engineer, you have to learn to translate something three-dimensional into two dimensions, and from 2 dimensions into 3 dimensions. So right now here you have 4 images that actually combined together show some kind of a mechanism that transfers movement. And actually, where's my, trying to find my cursor, but I cannot get the cursor, so I guess. So I learned very early on how to think three-dimensional. So I did an apprentice in a factory, and I went 2 days a week, I went to school. And this was actually the beginning of probably my professional career life. And this really informed me all along about how to think in 3 dimensions. And so for me, the step into Constellation was fairly simple, because this is actually how I started.
Yeah, but,
Okay, here we go.
That's what I say about systemic intelligence.
Michelle, could you mute your microphone, please? Thank you. So these days, I actually also talk a lot about mapping. And I find actually the term mapping very useful when I work either with individuals or with organizations. Because a lot of us, are used to maps by now. We know how to read maps. We drive in our cars, we look at maps. And I think that's a fairly simple terminology to actually translate what we do. And I also use the term archaeology. And the reason I'm using archaeology is because we're talking about the seen and the unseen, what's underneath, what's behind. I also find one. Cornelia, would you mind turning your microphone off? Also, part of archaeology is the layers. We have layers, we have structures, we have cracks. These are all terminologies that I find useful when explaining organizational constellations, or constellations in general, of what is it that we're looking for. So why structural constellations, and what are they exactly? So I kind of created this little map for myself. So if you look at the top, you see past, present, and future. So in my opinion, most of the constellation work that we learn is, family constellation that always kind of looks into the past. Where does something come from? The family structure, the family history, and the same actually with organizational constellation. Traditionally, we'll kind of look into the past. Where's an issue coming from? And then in the present, I think actually structural constellations are more kind of in the present, where we look at what actually is. We're not looking into the past. We're not looking really into where something came from, but we're looking more at what exists right now. And in this package is also in this the present constellation. I also have the constellation of the self, which is more kind of related to Franz Rupert's work, is kind of also in that category. And then more sort of future oriented are maybe solution-focused constellations, and something that I also call liminal constellations. That is something that I have been exploring for the last 10 years. So that's another kind of work that I do. So sometimes it's a little tricky to find actually a structure. And one example I have done a lot of work with Waldorf schools in my past, and still do at times. And that's like, for instance, that's a system that is really hard to nail down as a structure. And I've done constellations with them where we looked at the academic and the organizational part of the school, and it was always very difficult to find a structure. So sometimes that actually happens. But when I work with an organization or any kind of system, I always try to see what are actually the elements of that system. What's there that we can actually work with? And then see, can we create something of the existing elements? Can we actually use those? Can we set up a structure for that? Now, a structure, if you look on the right side, you see a very strict structure, very organized structure. And on the left, you see sort of more of a free-form kind of a structure. When I set up a structural constellation, I try to have it very formal, so that we can actually very clearly understand the structure, we can see it, and we don't get so much into the field of emotions or emotional triggers of, well, how should this actually be, and what's the flow of this. So we don't get hung up by flow or by how the system is actually set up. So we set it up as something very simple, very geometric, that kind of keeps that conversation more at bay. And initially, when I set up a structural constellation, I want to know, what is the system actually, what is it doing? What is its function? Or what is it trying to do? That could be maybe a secondary step. But primarily, what is the system doing? And just looking at the relationship of the elements, how are they set up? What's the relationship? And maybe then as a next step is, what are the dynamics? We have the structure itself, but then we also have the dynamics that can actually be different, and can also be different from different point of views. And then, if you look at these two images, they're actually pretty much the same. But sometimes we, as an outsider, we actually have a different impression of the structure than the people who are inside the system. So that can also be interesting, just to explore what is the perception of the structure inside and from a facilitator's point of view. They might be very different. What are the tools to use to set up structures? And that can actually be very important, how we actually set up these structures. So for a long time, I used to use wooden figures that you see on the top left. And I actually still do that when I don't know the system that well, when I don't know my client that well. And what you see also on the top right are small little foam mats. They're tiny, they're like 3x4 or something like that. And I can label them and we can move them around. And the reason I like to use either figures or little foam mats is because they don't talk. We can move them around and they're not going to say, oh, this is not my place. And, I don't want to be standing here. And, and we just look at, what is the configuration? What is the setup? What is actually the structure? Then on the bottom left, I will talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. These are bigger foam mats, and people actually stand in them and actually report from them. And this is actually something, a case study that I'll explain at the end a little bit what that is. And actually 4 people set up that structure. In the middle is using people, and sometimes it's useful to actually put name tags on them, to actually label what they represent, especially if you work with a new group and they haven't done constellation work before, and it might be easier from them to actually notice, oh, who else is actually in the space here. And then, of course, on the bottom right side are sticky notes. And I've done many constellations with sticky notes in restaurants and coffee shops. And again, it's a very simple way to set something up or just to look at a given structure. And again, this always has to do with what is safe for the system and what is safe for the client and for you, so that you don't get too fast into some kind of an emotional state. Then we just look at actually what is happening. So one of the first structural constellations that I've ever learned was the tetralemma. And I'm not going to get much into a tetralemma, but tetralemma is really about 2 opposite situations where when we choose either one of them, it might be a bad choice. It might be a difficult choice. And here's also another example of a tetralemma. And so it's always 2 opposites. It's the one or the other, and they're opposites, or it's choosing both or none. And the surprise part is that when you first work with these opposites for a while, you might notice that the client actually might not be able to find an answer. Because sometimes when we have opposites to work with, it's really difficult to come up with an answer. So in a tetralemma, sometimes we actually throw in what we call an additional choice, maybe the wild card or a free element or a free spirit or something totally different or none of the above. So we set up this cross constellation, and then when nothing actually happens, we bring in this 5th element or this 6th element that suddenly can actually shift something. But that's I haven't been able to use it that much because it doesn't happen that often that we come across a client that has that kind of a question or problem to solve. Another one that I've also learned, and this was at my organizational training in Holland in 2005, and Harrison was there as well, but I'm not sure if his group did this as well. This is the balance scorecard. And you can actually just put a person in each one of these fields and just see how are they responding to each other. My suggestion is that when you set up a structure, any given structure, hopefully you actually are familiar with that structure. Hopefully you actually know this particular field very well. So if questions come up, you can answer them, or you can get more into depth with the questions that arise. So there are many different kinds of forms like this that can be used for a structural constellation. But I suggest, if this is new to you, that you start with something really simple. I mean, here's like a structure just with 3 elements. Shareholders, customer protection regulations, rising customer expectations. This is something that comes from the banking system. So I want to say that almost every field has certain structures that they are actually used, that are already part of their organizational field. So when you get into a new field, you can find out what are the structures that are used within that system. And if that is part of your client's question, you can use that given structure to do a constellation. So sometimes we might also experience extreme complex structures. I mean, if you look at this chart, this comes from the online communication system, and this is really, really complicated. So if somebody comes to you and says, this is the structure we're working with, I would say to me, this would be way too complicated. And I would actually have to ask, what are the issues? What's going on here? Where are your main questions? And then kind of to sort out, are there maybe like 2 sectors in here or 3 sectors that we should look at? And how can we scale this down so that it's actually manageable for us to actually look at? Or do we look at just one sector within this complexity? Is there like an issue in one sector, and then let's just look at that one sector within this whole system here? There's also like just a traditional org chart. Now, I wouldn't recommend to have the people who are in those places represent themselves in those places. That could get really emotional pretty fast. But let's say if you are working with the CEO, if you're just coaching the CEO and he has questions about the team, or I don't know if you ever read the book by Arthur Klein, Who Really Matters. He looks at organizations and organizational structures, and sometimes the people who actually really matter might actually not even be on this chart here in terms of an organization. But that's a very good question to ask, like when you coach a CEO, who actually really matters? And even if you look at this chart, do these people matter, or are there people who are not on this chart that actually matter? And again, when you set out this field, you can easily move things around and see, is there a better organizational structure to actually make this better, or do we need to replace some of the people because certain functions are not really sufficiently taken care of? Quadrants. There are a lot of quadrants. And I remember Michael Spade, you were on our last call, and we talked about Ken Wilber's quadrants. So they can be used to do structural constellations. So here's Stephen Covey's, and there are many other quadrants. So, and quadrants, also they're fairly simple. They're not that complex. And so we can use different kinds of quadrants where we just look at, so what's going on? What's happening here right now? We can also use structural constellations to actually create designs, to actually start a project. So this is like a layout of a web page or of a web design. All the different elements that actually need to be in there. So when we start a project, we could actually lay it out with little mats, little whatever you use to lay out the entire project and see what's actually needed. What kind of functions, what kind of elements, how are they connected? So this is something from astronomy. And the reason I have this map here is because I wouldn't even understand this. I have no clue what this actually means. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we could not do a constellation out of this. Because sometimes, if you have a client that actually understands the map, I think that can be enough. That we just help them how to work with their own map. I think we need to understand enough so that we can support them and assist them in looking at the different elements. And all that anytime, because when we are a facilitator, we are an outsider. And as outsiders, we always ask questions that the insiders don't ask themselves. So even just setting something up, and even as a layperson, just asking simple questions can actually help an expert who wouldn't necessarily ask those questions. So we don't always have to understand the map. But then sometimes, when we don't know exactly what to set up, we can make suggestions. We can ask, what's needed here. What are the roles that you have? What are the goals? What do we need to look at? And then we set up a map around that. So we can create a map just on spontaneously, and just look at what are the elements that an individual or organization is struggling with, and then just see what shows up right here and now. And we don't have to go into the past. We don't have to set up the founders and the storyline, but just look at what's happening right now. What are the dynamics that are existing right now? How do we understand systems and structures? So this actually comes from the trainings that I do, and I always ask the people who are in my trainings, what are the fields that you're familiar, what are the fields that you want to know about? And so at one point we set up the healthcare system because everybody at some point has to deal with healthcare. And not necessarily as an insider, maybe as an outsider, maybe just as a patient. So we can kind of sense into a system by just setting up elements that we know. So we set up these elements and then we just see, so what is my place? Is my place right smack in the center? And what is my experience of this? What can I learn from this system? How can I gain more insights? Maybe more empathy or more understanding. So, I'm from Boulder, and, Boulder's a little woo-woo, and everybody's into the spirituality. So some people wanted to see a chakra system. How does it work? What are the elements? How can we relate to this? And I'm just putting this in as an abstract possibility, because we might come across very strange things that we don't know. And why not set up a constellation? why not just see so what comes out when we set this up? Another one was a pack of wolves. And this came up also in the training. People just wanted to experience a system in nature, and this came up. And the photo that you see right now, we didn't work with that, but this is actually two packs meeting each other. And wolves have an incredible hierarchy, a very, very strict, enforced hierarchy. And when two packs meet each other, it gets really, really dangerous. It gets really scary, dangerous. And it's maybe not that unsimilar to organizations at times. So we can learn by just looking at any kind of system. And we don't know, I mean, again, in our wolf pack, we don't know anything about their story or their background or what's going on. And so the students actually set up this one wolf pack system and had an incredible experience just being in that system. So here's something else that I work a lot with Theory U, and when I need to introduce this to a group of people who don't know it, I actually use this map. And I have people actually stand in this map. And they can learn this whole theory by standing in this map and interacting with each other. And then actually embody these different places. So they can learn about an abstract theory by actually standing in the map and conversing about it. So I want to share a couple case studies. And this first one it comes from Germany. And this actually was a case study that happened in 2015. So back to my diagrams, back to my original training. What you're looking at the left and right is a diagram of a ballpoint pen. This is just the tip of the ballpoint pen. On the outside is the plastic casing, probably. On the inside is the little casing where the fluid is inside, and then there's the ball. And that's what you write with. And the problem was actually that there was this manufacturer that manufactured these ballpoint pens, and then they were shipped, and when they arrived, they didn't work well. They were kind of jamming, and they just didn't really work. And they couldn't figure out what's going on. So what they did was in the Constellation, they actually set up a Constellation for this. On the left side, you see on the top, you see the inner pipe, you see the ball, and then you see the outer pipe. And they set up this Constellation, and actually nothing really revealed itself. Nothing really came up. So somebody had this idea that maybe we need actually two representatives for the inner pipe because it holds a fluid and it's more complex, and maybe we also need two for the outer pipe because again it holds something on the inside, so these are more complex. So they set that up. And then all of a sudden the outer pipe said there's something pushing on me. I feel a push against me. So they set another person up as whatever was pushing against them. And what showed up was the packaging of the transportation. And the packaging of the transportation had jammed the outer pipe against the ball and jammed it up. So the resolution was that they changed the packaging for transportation, and everything was fine. I mean, who would have thought that the Constellation would actually show this? I mean, to me, when I read this, I thought it was just unbelievable. I mean, this really shows the incredible possibilities that constellations have. that we don't even tap into. We don't even think about it because, you know, traditionally we think about, okay, the grandparents and the parents and you know, the system, but it actually is structural constellation where we just look at the structure can show this to us. It's, to me, just mind blowing. So second one here, this is actually something I just did recently with a, and let's see how I actually phrase this. This is a family business with 4 partners. And they were kind of sort of emotionally triggering each other. And because, you know, this family, it's really kind of tricky to work with families and also even for the families themselves. You know, how do you cuddle this apart between the organizational system and the family system? So I worked with something that I have been working with for the last about a year now, what I call actually the constellation of helplessness and enoughness. So unfortunately, I don't have my cursor, so I can't really point at anything here. But so in the front, you see 4 mats. And then in the middle, you see 4 mats. And then in the back, there's 2 times 4 mats. So these are four constellations. So each one of the partners set up themselves, 1 mat for helplessness, 1 mat for enoughness, and 1 mat for the trigger. So each one did actually their own constellation. And again, this is a structure. We did not look at how are you affecting the others, but we were just looking at what is your trigger. And the trigger could have been another person, or the trigger could have been a client, or could have been a system that's set up, but just looking at the triggers. And again, this constellation only took maybe about, I think we worked with this for maybe just for 20 minutes maximum. Maybe might have not even been that long. And the idea is just to look at what is happening in this given setup. And then we reconvened and we had a conversation about what showed up. Again, we didn't go into the past and into anybody's storyline. We just looked at what showed up and then what should actually happen next, and how could actually these 4 people, how could they support each other so that they do get less triggers and they can work more productively actually together as a team. And that's actually kind of like the end of the official presentation. And let's see, here we go. And now we're back here. And I know this was probably, maybe it was a lot, maybe it's not a lot, I don't know. So I'm making myself available to questions, conversation, whatever shows up for you.
First thing, Elmar, that was great.
Thank you.
Ditto, very helpful.
Thanks. Appreciate that.
I did have a question, Elmar, about liminal. You mentioned, you touched on that and you jumped away. And what do you mean by liminal?
So
He was afraid you'd ask that.
I was afraid.
It does look like he's not happy with that question.
So liminal constellations is a process that I unfortunately have not had the chance to practice very much. But the idea is actually that, you know, we all get together, even right now, we are creating a field together. But let's say if we have a field and we want to create something new, something that has not existed yet. Or even like if we work around an issue. So most of the time, we already have preconceived notions of how we have to go about it. especially actually also in constellation work. When we have to think about, we have to go into the past, we have to look at the parents and the grandparents, or we have to look at the structure, and liminal constellation is actually very different. A liminal constellation is almost we are tapping into the collective unconscious. So what we do is we actually, let's say we're focusing around an issue. I'm actually going to represent whatever comes up for me in regard to this issue. I'm not going to have a conversation. I'm not going to ask for permission. I'm just going to stand up and represent whatever just comes up, even if it doesn't even make any sense in regard to the issue. But just something that actually is happening within me. And, I've done this a few times and it's been totally mind-blowing. So people will come up with stuff that seems totally random. And suddenly it connects somehow. And it brings us actually to a new level of understanding that has not been before at all.
Does it have a relationship to theory U, do you think?
I don't know. I came up with this long before I knew about theory U.
Is there an example?
But it could.
Is there an example of what you constellated, or an example of what?
I can give you one example, but it's not an organization. It wasn't an organizational issue. It was a personal issue where a woman had a problem with her mother. And so I said, okay, I had a group of people and I asked them for permission, can we try something totally new? And they all said yes. I said, okay. So I said, okay, so let's listen to this woman's story. And after you hear the story, I want that you totally forget what you just heard. And then I want that you just tap into yourself of what's alive in you. What's alive right now. And then you stand up and you announce what it is that you want to represent. So one person stood up and said, I want to represent the wall. There was nothing about the wall in the story. Another person stood up and said, I want to represent the pony. And there was nothing about a pony in this story. So we did a constellation and somebody represented, actually nobody represented the client. Somebody represented the mom and the pony and the wall, and there was maybe another fourth element. And there was something about the pony happened in the story, but nobody, even the client couldn't make sense of it. Client could not make sense. I said, okay, let's just see what happens. And luckily, about a month later, actually, I met with the same group again. And this woman, she was there and she was totally excited and oh, wow, I need to tell you this. I was like, oh, so tell us what happened. So she said the reason her mother and her had an issue was because her mother never got what she wanted in life. Mm-hmm. And she, the daughter, always got whatever she wanted. And the mother was jealous. She was jealous, she was angry, she was annoyed at her daughter. Because the only thing that her mother always wanted was a pony. So how did the field know that there was a pony? Because somehow the field is actually alive. And the reason actually I came to this work was because I really wanted to test the field. I wanted to know, does the field exist? Can we trust the field? Because otherwise we're just doing some sort of an experiment that we kind of already know. We kind of already have a sense of where this is going to go and what the solution might be. And to me, that's kind of boring. It's just a means that I'm a step ahead of my client, but not more than that. Catherine.
Yeah, thank you for this presentation. I want to see if I understand a couple basic things about structural constellations.
Yeah.
And then ask you if some things I've been in, if this would fit your definition.
Mhm.
So if I understand this correctly, a basic difference between, well, you could say there's structural constellations and there's phenomenological constellations.
Yep.
And in a phenomenological constellation, you kind of pick the representatives as they appear in the person's story.
Yep.
And let them find their own places. And then we do have patterns in mind, right? Because we have the orders of love and this and that and blah, 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 whatever.
Yep.
But really, you're going through it phenomenologically, and the next thing appears, you know, because of what you've just done or what the field tells you.
Yeah.
And in a structural constellation, the structure is already set, correct?
You decide with your client what is the structure.
Yeah.
And the structure itself should not change.
Right.
Except if you're at some point you say, well, let's try change the structure.
Right. But then it's still the structure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I think the structure should be is set, and you just look at the dynamics between the elements.
Yeah.
What is the dynamic that exists? So the structural constellation is really about the here and now. What exists here and now? Not what happened before, not what wants to happen next.
Okay. So in in this training that I did in the Netherlands, I think what we did a lot of for our own personal growth during it were little structural constellations. There were many of them, but the one I remember the most is where we would be in a group of like 5 or 6, but 4 people would be in the constellation, and it would be a representative for me, or it was me, I don't remember. And then if, you know, something about my success, what do I need to be disloyal to? That was one of the representatives.
Yeah.
What is my current work? And where, you know, what's my desired future, right? So that little foursome,
Yep.
That was a structural constellation, right?
Yep, correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
So they can, other times it's, we did one where it would be like, well, a problem solving constellation, right? Here's the outcome I want.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe here's the resources, here's the problem, and here's me.
Yeah.
Right? And it doesn't have to be personal, it could be organizational, right?
Yep. Yep. So Catherine, to your point, so you did this in a group of 5 people or whatever, and everybody got to do the exact same constellation.
Yes, exactly.
And not like, you know, we did your family and then, you know, you did somebody else's family and they look totally different.
Same constellation.
Exactly. Yep.
Very powerful.
Yes, very powerful. And you can actually kind of compare results.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think you can, with a structural constellation, you can do a structural constellation in an organization, let's say, as a measure. Where are we in the organization right now? And then you do some work with them, you do some facilitation, you do some training with them, and then you can do the exact same constellation again later. And then you can see actually, oh, what shifted? What's different now?
Mm-hmm. Using the same structure.
Exactly.
Yeah, nice.
Which we cannot do if we do a phenomenological constellation. We cannot duplicate that.
Mm-hmm.
It does not exist anymore. As soon as we do a constellation and we do the process itself already changes the phenomena. So even if we do the same constellation, you know, phenomenological constellation twice, it has already changed.
Mm-hmm.
Michael?
So you just made me think, so it's like there's, or test me on this or check me. It's like there's no healing movement. There's only the dynamics of what's
I'm having a
true.
hard time hearing you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, just speak a little bit louder.
So it's like there's no healing movement. There's just the dynamic structure and whatever the dynamics are within that.
Yeah. Oh, now he went totally away.
Sorry, go on.
Good.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Could you hear that question or no?
Yes.
that's part of it. And then you talked some more, and that we didn't hear this. But I can talk about the healing part. You know, structure, to me, a structural constellation is not about healing itself.
Yes.
To me, actually, I think a structural constellation is actually, to me, so totally fundamental that I think we should actually do structural constellations all the time, because we should understand, where are we at this given point? Where are we actually right now?
Yeah, that makes sense.
What's going on right now before we do any kind of intervention or any kind of work? Because even the client most of the time does not understand their system, what's really going on.
Sure.
You know, they have their own construction, their own mental construction of what the organization is, and who's working and who's not working, and what's going on, what's not going on. It's a mental construct. And not to say that, you know, a structural constellation is not a mental construct, but maybe we can verify it a little bit more. Maybe it can be a little bit more objective about what's actually happening.
So the other thing I saw was that the integral quadrants, when we lay them out on the floor, which we always do, we always lay them out on the floor, that is immediately a constellation. I mean, it's not just that it could be, but it is a constellation.
It is a constellation.
And the field is there and can constellates that way. And it's just like it's funny that we just use that as like the centerpiece of the table.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
In that kind of a just to follow up and then I'll stop. So Elmar, in a kind of a constellation where you say with your client, let's do this to diagnose where we are right now.
Yeah.
And do you have them sense into where those elements? And how do you tell them they're doing?
Well, so it depends what we set up, you know, and what tool I use to set it up. You know, if I use little figures, you know, they have little eyeballs. So sometimes even if you just set those up, and, you know, then I say, it's interesting, you know, how come that this group here, they look outside? Is this by accident, or is it by design? Did you think about this, or do they really look away? And so even just little comments like that, you know, start conversations.
Okay.
Even if it's just 4 things, even if you set up 4 elements, just the way they're set up, or like if you have little mats and they have like a little dot or a little directional sign, it's like, oh, interesting. You know, how are they pointing? Is that actually how they work? Do they function like that, or does, you know, do the colors have meaning? You know, you just kind of just ask questions that come up for you. Because we can't really totally prepare ourselves for what happens in a constellation. You know, it's not like you can figure it out in advance. These are the questions I'm going to ask. I mean, mostly I just follow whatever comes up for me. And then I think, well, if this is a relevant question for me, it might be a relevant question for the client. So I just kind of follow my instincts.
Thank you.
Todd? David? Sorry.
Yeah, I wanted to hear more about your framing of saying something's going too quickly to emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Different decisions that are made that keep it from going too quickly to emotion.
Yeah.
And I wanted to know particularly about the family business one, where things like enoughness, triggers, and things are on the floor, which I think signal potentially quite emotional loaded opportunities for them to like feel that and see that.
Yeah. So as you know, when we work in organizations, emotions is not the best thing to go to. You know, we want to try to stay as emotionally neutral as possible for as long as possible. And when we do constellation work, it can get emotional. You know, because as you know, when you set up a field with anybody, it doesn't take more than 5 minutes for people to become identified with something. Probably less than 5 minutes. People are already identified with a certain mat, a certain figure, a certain position, a certain job description, a task. People get identified really fast. So this is why I try to you start with something that's remote first, like, you know, with figures on a table or little mats on a table, where, you know, I can say, and I say this often, you know, I like to work with these little things because they don't speak and they don't have they don't cry, they don't scream, you know, we can just look at them. We just look at them kind of very gently. Just, you know, what's happening here. So I name these things so that it becomes part of the awareness that this could actually happen. So with going to the mats on the floor with my 4 clients. So again, this was a family business. I've worked with them before. So I kind of knew how much they could take or not take. But I decided to make this 4 distinct constellations where everybody could actually experience their own emotions and they would own their own emotions. And we also talked about during the process that nobody can actually make you feel a certain way. We actually choose to feel a certain way. Yes, we get triggered, but if we go into either helplessness or enoughness, that is a choice we have. And this is a constellation process that I designed about a year ago. And it's probably right now my most powerful tool. It's very amazing. But again, you know, you always have to set this up in a very safe way that people are protected, especially when working with a group. Did that answer your question, David?
Yes, thank you. I think I'll have to look back at it and maybe walk myself through it to have more of a personal experience of it.
Okay.
Because I'm curious about that one in particular.
Well, yeah, there's more to that than I was just explaining. There's
a quick question also. A couple people have asked if slides will be shared, Elmar. Is that something you intend to share?
Well, they're on this video.
Oh, yeah. And the video will be in the Google Doc, and those
right.
who participate in the emails and get the emails will also have that link. So
yeah.
Just to reframe that for people who asked, it'll be in an email with a link to the Google Doc if you have that.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Well, I guess we can end early.
Well, I'll just a point of if you're open to a thought there, I do something a little different. I don't know if I could share that, Elmar.
Sure, totally.
But I appreciate wonderful material you're providing here. Often the most basic, and as Catherine brought out, is what's the goal, what's the obstacle, and then the problem holder or the focus. Yep. And that's a real basic constellation and yep. In organizational or leadership setting. But I'm okay with setting that up, having 3 people set up, and then, you know, what's the source of the problem? Problem is a symptom, or the obstacle is a symptom. And what's the symptom is not the problem. The symptom is, you know, what appears to be the problem. And then do some healing dialogue with the source. What's the message, or what's needed in terms of resource. You know, things can shift just very quickly in a very simple constellation where you don't spend much time, and that people can rotate through that. And when I've got a large group, sometimes I'll set up 3 people, 4 people, triad, quadad, and let them kind of rotate through, and I'll run around and help when they're stuck. So just another viewpoint from my perspective.
Well, thanks, Harrison. Actually, I appreciate it a lot, because I don't consider myself the expert of structural constellations. I just want to start a conversation, because I'm I've been doing this for so long, and I find this so exciting, and I find there's no conversation around this work.
Yeah.
And to me, that's really, there's a miss.
Well, I love the discussion about the emotion, and that's always kind of that's a real finesse.
Yeah.
That is the biggest finesse. What's safe and what's not, and what's the context.
Yeah. David?
Do you have a particular structure or model that you've used that you like that has to do with organizations struggling with founder syndrome, where a founder has reached the end of their usefulness to the organization, they're getting in the way of what they've created?
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to name often with a lot of pride and identity in that. I'm wondering if there's a structure that you've seen or used, experimented with that scenario.
So I have very few systems that I keep setting up over and over. I almost want to say that I don't have any. It's actually my preferred answer. It would be more that I would have a conversation with everybody being part of the system and just noticing what's alive in that system. And can we set up a structure from that without having to go into the storyline or into the past, but just to see what is in the system. What is the question that's in the system, and what are the elements of that? And if I can just tag something onto that, I was asked a couple of weeks ago to help in a Constellation training to teach how to do one-on-one constellations. And so I just talked a little bit about my philosophy, and then I asked if somebody had, I gave the students a little assignment. I said, is there anything that you want to change about yourself? And we'll do a constellation around that. And I don't remember exactly what one person raised his hand, and he said, I want to be able to listen deeper. So I just said, okay, so what's the issue with that? What's preventing you from that? And then he said something else, like his inner critic or something. And I said, okay, let's just set that up. So we set up listening better, his inner critic, and himself. So we set up these three elements. We didn't do anything about his family and his grandmother and the war in Germany and none of that stuff. We just set up these three things, and it was a constellation. Took maybe about 15 minutes, and it was amazing. It was totally amazing. The guy said, his brain is literally rewiring itself. He sat there and he was like in a trance, and he said, all this stuff is going on with my brain here right now. And this is really amazing. And this was just a structure, just three elements. That's it.
Elmar, with that, do you let them find their place in the field, or do you set them up like in a triangle or in some kind of totally regular?
So he actually set it up just sort of like random first. And then I had him stand in these different places. Yeah. And actually, I didn't even, sometimes I stand in those places, but I didn't. I just had him stand in these three places. And then he said, oh, this is all right. I said, okay, just find a better arrangement. And he eventually set it up exactly in a triangle. And then he stood in those places. And I said, in my opinion, a constellation is done if there's no more question, if all the elements are happy with where they are. And he said, everything's happy, everything's the way it needs to be. And then he sat down and he had like his brain transformation happening, and that was it. I think Lakshmi has a question.
So Elmar, I think my curiosity is peaked. It's at an all-time high. And I love the work you're doing with organizations, but I think this case study you just described of this one-on-one session, I think is very compelling. And so I'm wondering if you have any pointers to perhaps demonstrations that you have up on YouTube, or of other people in the field that you respect. It would be really cool to watch a session sort of cradle to grave.
Yes, that would be cool. I would watch it too. I have. See, I don't really know people who actually do structural constellations on a consistent basis.
How about
Yeah.
yourself? You don't have a recorded version of your work?
I'm sorry, I don't.
No, okay.
It's the kind of tricky because videotaping your clients is
Right. Unless it's for instructional purposes and you've got the
But
No,
it's
I
a good thought, and I'll keep the thought in mind. Thank you, Lakshmi. Ellen?
This is Ellen. I would, as Elmar was telling that story, I was taken to experience I have with neuro-linguistic programming community, because it has this sort of solution focus, what's your goal, what do you really want, what's stopping you, very simple. And then they sort of set it up in their mind. But when you said it was a brain transformation, I thought, yeah, neurologically rewiring, what's going on. But I say that because they do have a lot of demonstrations online and so on about that particular set of elements.
Thank you, Ellen. Anything else? Oh, Cassandra? Can't hear you.
I just did a unit of work out in LA with the corporation that was about to redefine their purpose, and they were a 20-year-old company, and they had co-founders, and one brought the money, one brought the idea. And as we were preparing to do the purpose redesign work with a slice of the organization, the CEO said that the guy who came with the money, his co-founder, didn't need to be there. They're kicking him out of the organization. The new equity partner said he didn't contribute that much, so why are we even bothering with him? And the VP of operations said he was the essential piece that built the business, and he was the face of the organization to all of their clients, their international clients. And knowing this founder dynamic was happening, I basically structured a constellation in my hotel room that basically placed everyone where it felt they should be. I had also talked to the CEO about having an empty chair, and the equity partner, representing the co-founder in the event that he was not going to be present. And that went into a 20-minute tirade on how they met each other and what he went through and blah, 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 blah. And he just doesn't fit where we're going now. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to give up on it. But I carried a token to the meeting that day, the workshop. We had about 30 people. And I just set a space for this token on my work table, where it turns out that I sat up front. There was an empty chair beside me, and then there was the CEO. So somehow the CEO allowed space for the co-founder, who was not present, to have an empty chair, even though he said definitely not. And to open the session, we asked him to give the history, the major milestones of the company. And he gave so much attribution to the co-founder, he spent 20 minutes talking about, in a very negative way. He gave 20 minutes worth of praise around how they built the company 20 years ago. And the field addressed the issue that we had of trying to honor the co-founder that was being kicked out. So it's okay to do structural constellations in your hotel room. That's what
Yes. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. I think we can actually learn a lot also just by setting something up for ourselves before we see the client. And also one thing that I think we might have talked about this before is also to find where's our place in a constellation or with our client. Because sometimes we can be in the way, or we can be not at the appropriate place. Maybe we can be too close. And sometimes I ask my clients to place me. So where do you want me? in relation to the system? Do you want me to be close to the system? Do you want me as an observer? Do you want me as a partner? Where do you want me? Because that can have a huge impact, because so many times when we do constellation, we actually become a part of the system. Even an organizational constellation, family constellation, we become part of that. And it's good to know, what's the best place for the client for us to be.
I can also imagine in that scenario that someone may say where they want you, and let's say you set that up and find that there's something unhealthy about where they want you.
Right. Yes, correct. Yes.
And getting feedback from the constellation could be really revealing for them, like, oh, that's clearly, feeding you to the wolves if I put you there.
Yeah. Or you can easily get entangled because you're too close to the system.
Yeah. Which is good insight for them to know what they're asking of other people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, David. Jenny?
Hi. Thanks, Elmar. Really enjoying thinking about this and hearing your hunger for discourse and companions. And I think you found some of us. I'm looking forward to exploring this, even just with myself, kind of thinking about as I'm planning my day or any little thing, just like using some kind of structure to start experimenting with holding the elements in a map. And then I notice that it gives me an opportunity to revisit the catalog of theories that I have, that I carry with me, like I've done theory U, and and earlier I was thinking, oh, this is a great way to practice for sharing theory U, for example, and showing, and so it could be a tool for that. But I really heard you saying that you want to approach each system freshly instead of having a preconceived map for it. And that sounds really beautiful. So I'm just appreciating and reflecting, and I'm going to do some exploring, but I also want to suggest, in addition to Lakshmi's suggestion about making a video, and thinking that it may be a really powerful way for you to catalyze more conversation and dialogue. If you could, even on LinkedIn or some, place, you could have some place where you demonstrate something, online, and maybe we could support you in that in some way. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Jenny. I appreciate it. Thank you. It's a great idea. So I noticed the time. I think we have about 8 more minutes. So why don't we just do a little checkout? And I want to invite everybody just to say just a little bit something about your experience here, what you learned about this group, anything. But if you could just keep it short so that everybody could actually say something, because we have 15 people and we have about 8 minutes. So I think that's about a half a minute per person, if I'm correct. So if we can just start on the top left here, I see Michael. Maybe if you could start.
Really useful to me, has my mind exploding a little bit. I did a structural constellation just today. You taught me well, Elmar. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Michael. Ellen?
Hi, yeah, thanks. I think it's just a really important conversation to keep alive for lots of reasons. As OD consultants, we bring a lot of models, right? A lot of theory, a lot of so on. And we use them, and we don't think about them as constellations, right? And so I think it's really important for us to recognize, something that can be readily accepted, in particular around the dashboards and measuring where we're at, taking stock and all of that, and log those as ways of knowing as constellation work. So thanks for holding that torch.
Thanks, Ellen. Catherine?
I'll ditto Ellen, 100%. And by way of furthering the conversation, I met an Australian constellator last year, Sarah Cornely, who's a business consultant. and she uses structural constellations for business issues and phenomenological ones for business transformation. So I just wanted to offer that.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Catherine. Harrison?
Oh, yeah, thanks again, Elmar, for a wonderful presentation. And I would propose your liminal constellation is a structural structure. You know, you let the structure emerge from the field. So I think it's apt that you brought that in. And now you're a resource for the tetralemma. So I'm going to call you next time I have a double mind.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Harrison. Linda?
Pleasure to be in the audience with you, Elmar, and everybody. I realize I've done a lot of structural constellations. I did study the books that you also read, and way back when, and I studied your liminal some time ago too, and I really like it. And I use them quite often. I prefer this. I mean, it's a combination of our using our skills all the time and being empty when we start. I don't set anything up really when I go to start something. I just let it flow, and if tetralemma fits in, great. If if something else, I do a lot of things I call abstract constellations where I don't know what's up at all. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Linda. Jenny? Yeah, I'm muted. Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I feel like I already spoke adequately. Thank you very much. Enjoyed you all.
Thanks, Jenny. David?
I would just add that I like that pairing of the agility with structure. I didn't know going in what I was going to learn, but I just like seeing the agile aspects that I'm hearing in that. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, David. Cassandra? Can't hear you.
I'm grateful to sit at your knee and learn. The structural constellation format is very powerful in diagnostic and understanding what's going on and how to keep it going. So I'm excited about the exploring this in deeper and deeper layers, particularly for the project.
Great. Thanks, Cassandra.
Thank you.
Betsy?
Hi, I was able to get here just at the end. I'm sorry to say, but I'll go back and listen. It's very nice just to be with everyone, see your faces, and Elmar, I can just really experience your kind of open-heartedness, and it's lovely.
Thank you. It's good to see you, Betsy.
Thank you.
And you can go and watch the video. So
yes, I will.
Yeah, great. Linda?
I think that's me. I also I came at the wrong time. I misjudged the time difference here in Australia. I'm pretty good at that. But I did get a couple of things out of even what I heard. So I'm looking forward to getting to know you all a bit better and staying in this group and learning. And yeah, love that you've pulled it together. It's awesome.
Thanks, Linda. I know there's a little bit of a problem with the time change because I was on a call just earlier with people from Mexico and I thought they were at the same time, but they were not at the same time. So I hope we could get rid of this time change at some point. It's really confusing, at least for me. Casey, I know I can't see you, but maybe you can hear us. Did you want to share something?
Yes, I've just dropped in out of curiosity, so
Sure.
I don't really. There's a lot here that was discussed that's really interesting to me, but it would probably just send me on a Google rabbit hole a little bit later. But yes, you've definitely piqued my interest, and this was a very interesting conversation to.
Great, thank you. And you know this is videotaped, so if you want to go back and watch the whole thing again, it will be available. Thank you. Cornelia? Can you hear me, Cornelia? Would you like to share something?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, just adding my thanks and my apologies for hollering unmuted at the end. Et bonjour, Michel.
It was, sorry, I couldn't hear the last part.
And I'm saying hello to Michelle Blecher by
sure.
here.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot,
Hello.
Elmar.
Please be back. Bye, Cornelia.
Thank you.
Michelle, would you like to share something? Can you hear me, Michelle?
Yeah, I can hear you. I don't know if you can see
Now
me.
I can see you. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So what I want to say is first, thank you. And thank to Catherine that invited me and made me aware of this talk today. And I enjoyed the conversation. I'm fairly new to organizational. It's just about a year that I have become involved in it. And I've been in the IOCT where I heard a lot about structural constellations. And it's interesting because I've been a family constellator for a while now. So sometimes intuitively we do things that then we are labeled without even knowing. I guess the intuitive mind works that way. And I love to discover and go and deep a little, dive a little more into things that intuitively I will understand, but and by sharing with other people and like you, who is a veteran, it's really wonderful, and I appreciate that. And I say hello to Cornelia because she did, and to everybody. It was a pleasure to be there, and I will make sure that I'll be there often. And actually, I'm here with two other students that you can see.
Awesome.
Alcio and Viviani. We've been listening to you, not from the beginning, and I apologize because I know that you heard me when I was not supposed to talk.
Sure.
So
well, let's go back to the video at some point.
See you
Thank
soon.
you, Michelle.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And there's M. Larida. Can you hear me? M. Larida? No? And I think there was a Jenny Mish. I haven't seen you or heard you before. Jenny, can you hear me? Oh, there you are. Oh,
yes, I spoke.
Oh, you just went off. Okay. Is there anything else that wants to be said? Any announcement? Anything except for the May 29th will be the next presentation. That's the only thing I have. And I really want to thank you so much for showing up and being part of this conversation. And hopefully we can continue this conversation in some form. I would appreciate it because I need some more conversation around this. So having said that, thank you so much and see you soon again.
Thank you, Elmar.
Thank you.
Thank you.